My vacation in a luxury Turkish villa was supposed to be a dream, but the moment I found packages of forbidden substances hidden in my luggage, I realized I had been trapped by a calculated, heartless scheme. Now, with the authorities closing in and my own husband turning against me, I have to expose the deadly network controlling my life before I'm erased forever. The Aegean Sea shimmered like a polished sapphire from the balcony of our villa in Bodrum, but I couldn't enjoy the view. My hands were shaking so hard that the iced coffee I was holding rattled against the glass coaster. My mother-in-law, Asa, was sitting across from me, sipping her tea with that thin, predatory smile she'd perfected over the last decade. Behind her, my husband, Emre, was busy on his laptop, completely oblivious to the venom dripping from his mother's tongue. "You know, Clara," Icy said, her voice smooth as silk but sharp as a razor, "it's quite fascinating how comfortable you've become living off my son's hard-earned money. Here in Turkey, we value tradition. We value a wife who contributes, not one who simply decorates the furniture." Blinked, stunned. "Us, we've discussed this. The renovation for this villa, the landscaping. I paid for half of it with my own savings from my graphic design business, not to mention the flights and the car rental." She let out a dismissive laugh, waving a manicured hand toward the sea. "Savings? Those are play money earnings, dear. Everyone knows you barely scrape by. Emre carries the weight of this family, and yet here you are, freeloading in a house he supposedly co-owns with you. It's an embarrassment to our lineage." I felt the heat rising in my chest. I had worked 60-hour weeks for 3 years to afford the down payment on this vacation home. I had liquidated my investments to make sure it was perfect, hoping it would be a bridge between her and me. I wanted her to see me as a partner to her son, not a leech. But she had made it her life's mission to paint me as a gold digger who had trapped her successful Turkish business heir son. "I have the receipts, Ace," I said, my voice steadying despite the adrenaline. "Every transaction, every transfer, I am a 50% owner of this property." She stood up slowly, her caftan flowing behind her like a shroud. She walked over to the railing, looking down at the pool where the gardener was trimming the hedges. "Receipts can be lost, Clara. Documents can be misinterpreted, especially when they are handled by those who don't understand the way things work in this country. Do you really think anyone here cares about your little digital transfers? In this family, ownership is about blood and reputation, and right now, your reputation is thin." I felt a cold chill wash over me. It wasn't just her usual brand of snobbery. There was a malice in her tone that felt calculated, something beyond a petty mother-in-law rivalry. "What are you talking about?" I asked, standing up as well. She turned to face me, her eyes devoid of warmth. "Emre is a good man, but he is easily distracted by pretty faces. He doesn't know that my legal team has already spent the morning reviewing the structure of this co-ownership. It seems there was a significant oversight in the paperwork you signed last year, a slight error in the jurisdiction, a misinterpretation of international tax laws. By tomorrow, your name will be stripped from the title." "That's impossible," I stammered. "I used a registered firm. I have the notarized copies." "Notarized by whom?" she whispered, leaning in close, her scent of heavy jasmine perfume choking me. "By people who answer to me? You think you've been living in a paradise, but you've been living in a cage I built. You didn't just lose your money, Clara. You've been implicated in something far darker." She pulled a folded manila envelope from the side table and tossed it onto the glass surface between us. My heart stopped. "I found these in your luggage while you were at the beach yesterday," she said softly. "Curious, isn't it? Packages with forbidden substances hidden in the lining of your suitcase. I have already placed a call to the local authorities. The Service of Internal Security is on their way, and they don't take kindly to people who smuggle items into the country." The air left my lungs. My suitcase? I had been at the beach for an hour. My bags were locked in the bedroom. She hadn't found them. She had put them there. "You're framing me?" I gasped, reaching for my phone, but she snatched it off the table before I could blink. "No," she said, her eyes glinting with a terrifying triumph. "I am simply correcting the imbalance. You see, the police are arriving now, and they aren't looking for a freelance designer. They are looking for a criminal network affiliate." Outside, the faint wail of a siren began to climb the winding road leading up to the villa. I rushed to the balcony edge, watching as 2 black SUVs pulled up to the gated entrance, men in uniforms spilling out with grim, professional efficiency. Emery finally looked up from his laptop, frowning at the noise. He walked over to the balcony, his face confused. "Mom, what's happening? Why is the police here?" Isa turned to her son, her expression shifting instantly to one of wounded concern. "Oh, Emery, my poor boy. I tried to warn you about her. I tried to tell you she wasn't who she claimed to be." I stood paralyzed, the sound of boots hitting the marble terrace echoing like a death knell. As the front door was kicked open, I realized my nightmare was only just beginning. "Clara, what is going on?" Emery's voice was filled with genuine confusion, but it was drowned out by the heavy thud of boots climbing our stairs. Before I could explain, before I could even scream that I had been set up, 4 men in dark tactical gear surged into the living area. They didn't look like local patrol officers. They moved with the cold, calculated precision of a specialized unit. The lead officer held a warrant, his face a mask of iron indifference. "Clara Bennett?" the man asked, his voice gravelly. I nodded, my throat so tight I couldn't articulate a sound. Ollie stepped forward, her hands pressed to her chest in a practiced display of motherly anguish. "I didn't want to believe it, officers. I truly didn't. She is my daughter-in-law, after all. But when I found those packages with prohibited substances in her personal effects, I knew I couldn't remain silent. I have a responsibility to this country." The officers didn't waste time on pleasantries. 2 of them moved past me into the bedroom. I heard the sound of my suitcase zippers being ripped open, the rustle of clothes being tossed aside, and then a heavy silence followed by a triumphant, "Found it!" "This is a mistake," I shouted, finally finding my voice, my hands balled into fists. "I have never seen those bags in my life. She put them there. Emery, tell them you were with me the whole time." Emery looked at me, then at his mother, his face a kaleidoscope of conflicting emotions, shock, fear, and a terrifying flicker of doubt. "Clara, I was working. I wasn't watching you every second." "You weren't watching her," AC interjected smoothly, placing a comforting hand on her son's arm. "Because you were blinded by love. You didn't see the late-night calls. You didn't notice the strange addresses in her browser history. I saw them, Emery. I saw the signs of someone connected to an organized scheme." I felt the handcuffs click around my wrists, the metal biting into my skin with icy finality. The room seemed to tilt. The dream villa I had spent my life savings on was now a crime scene. One of the officers held up a small, vacuum-sealed pouch that had been shoved into the hidden lining of my suitcase. It looked exactly like the material I had been accused of transporting. My brain raced. How could she have gotten hold of something so dangerous, and how could she have planted it without me noticing, unless she had been planning this for months? "You're an actress," I spat at her, tears of pure rage burning my eyes. "A cold, calculated monster. This isn't about my marriage. This is about the money, isn't it? You want the villa, you want the investment, and you want your son back under your control." AC leaned in, her voice a whisper, meant only for my ears, cold enough to freeze blood. "It's not just about the money, dear. It's about ensuring that you are never a threat to this family again. By the time the Service of Internal Security finishes with their interrogation, you'll be lucky if you see the son outside of a cell for the next 30 years. You've been implicated in a major distribution ring. Your life in America? That's over. Your assets, they've already been frozen by the state as part of the investigation into your alleged criminal connections." I was marched toward the door, my legs feeling like lead. As I passed Emery, I grabbed his sleeve. "Emery, look at me. She is lying. Do you really think I'm a criminal? I'm your wife." He pulled away, his expression hardening. He looked at his mother, then down at the floor, the weight of the social stigma and his mother's manipulation clearly crushing his resolve. "If this is true, Clara, I don't even know who you are." They shoved me into the back of an unmarked vehicle. The door slammed shut, sealing me in darkness. As the car pulled away from the villa, I caught a glimpse of Ice through the window. She wasn't looking at the police. She was checking her watch, her face completely composed, already moving on to the next item on her agenda. The ride to the detention center was a blur of nausea and panic. When the heavy steel doors opened, I wasn't taken to a processing desk. Instead, I was led into a windowless concrete room that felt more like a bunker than a police station. A man in a suit sat at the metal table, his file open. He wasn't a standard police officer. He possessed the sterile, terrifying aura of a high-level government agent. "Clara Bennett," he said, not looking up. "We've been watching your business for some time. We know you were laundering money through your design firm to support a dangerous criminal network." "I am a designer," I screamed. "I have never done anything illegal." He opened the folder and slid a photograph across the table. It was a picture of me, taken 3 months ago, standing outside a cafe in Istanbul. But I wasn't alone. Standing next to me, clearly visible in the grainy CCTV footage, was a man I had never seen before, a man I knew from the news reports was the head of a notorious trafficking cell. My heart stopped. The photo was a fake, a high-quality digital fabrication, but it looked so real that even I questioned my own memory. "The evidence is overwhelming," the agent said, leaning back, "but we are prepared to offer you a deal. We know you're just the courier. Tell us who the real leader of this organized scheme is. Give us your contact, and we might be able to reduce your sentence to a decade instead of an entire life." I stared at the fake photo, realizing with a jolt of horror that Icy wasn't just working alone. She had connections deep within the government apparatus. She had access to resources that could manufacture proof of a fake life. And then, the door behind the agent opened again. A guard stepped inside holding a phone. "Ma'am," the guard said, his tone icy, "you have a visitor. It's your husband. He says he has something he needs to tell you before the interrogation begins." Emre walked in, but he didn't look like the man I married. He was pale, his eyes darting toward the surveillance camera in the corner. He sat down opposite me and placed a small, crumpled piece of paper on the table, sliding it toward me under the guise of holding my hand. "I have to do this, Clara," he whispered, his voice trembling. "They told me if I don't help them, I'm the next one on the list." I unfolded the paper beneath the table. It wasn't a note of comfort. It was a list of names, the names of every person I had ever done business with, marked with red ink, and at the bottom, a single terrifying instruction. "If you want to live to see another day, you will sign the confession they put in front of you. And then, you will point the finger at my mother's business rival." I looked up at Emre, realizing that I wasn't just being framed for a crime I didn't commit. I was being used as a pawn in a bloody internal power struggle that went far deeper than a mother-in-law's jealousy. Suddenly, the room's intercom crackled to life, and a voice, not the agent's, boomed through the speakers. "Time is up, Mr. Bennett. Tell her what happens if she refuses." Emre's face turned the color of ash. He leaned in so close I could smell the faint, metallic scent of the cigarettes he'd nervously lit outside. "Clara, please," he breathed, his voice a frantic rasp. "They have my sister. They've been holding her since this morning. If you don't sign that paper and name the person they want, they'll make sure none of us leave this building." My head was spinning. The room felt as though it were shrinking, the concrete walls closing in like a trash compactor. "Your sister? Emre, this is madness. We can call the embassy. We can get a lawyer." "There are no lawyers here," he hissed, his eyes darting toward the camera again. "The people who run this facility are the same people who are running my mother's projects. Don't you see? She isn't just a bitter woman. She's an architect for an entire organized scheme. She's been grooming me to take over, and you were just the convenient scapegoat to wipe the slate clean of any loose ends." I stared at him, horror dawning on me. The man I had married, the man who claimed to love me, wasn't just a passive bystander. He was a terrified accomplice who had known about his mother's reach all along. He had brought me to this villa specifically so that, when the time came, I could be sacrificed to protect his family's position. The agent, who had been observing us from the corner, finally stepped forward, clicking a ballpoint pen with a rhythmic, maddening sound. He slid a thick stack of documents toward me. "The choice is yours, Mrs. Bennett. You can continue to play the innocent victim, which will result in a conviction for your role in the distribution of prohibited substances, an act that carries a truly massive, life-altering prison sentence. Or you can cooperate. Sign the statement identifying the CEO of the rival tech firm as the mastermind behind your illegal transport, and we will find a way to make you disappear into a witness protection program." I looked at the documents. They weren't just standard confession forms. They were perfectly drafted affidavits of perjury, designed to destroy a legitimate competitor of Ace's family business. If I signed, I would be committing a permanent act of malice, ruining an innocent person's life just to buy myself a reprieve from a life I didn't deserve to lose. "I won't do it," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'd rather rot in this cell than be another tool in your mother's collection." Emre let out a choked sob, grabbing my hands. "You don't understand. If you don't sign, they won't just lock you away. They'll make you disappear entirely. They have the power to scrub you from existence, Clara. No one will even know you were ever in Turkey." The agent laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "He's right, you know. We are currently holding your passport, your phone, and all records of your entry into the country are being purged from the digital database as we speak. By tomorrow morning, it will be as if you never existed, a ghost in the system." I looked around the room, desperate for an exit, a flaw, a weapon, anything. My eyes landed on the ventilation grate near the floor. It was slightly rusted, and behind it I could see a faint glimmer of light reflecting off a conduit pipe. "I need a minute," I said, feigning weakness. "I need water." The agent signaled to the guard, who stepped out into the hallway. Emre watched me with wide, terrified eyes. I reached down, pretending to slump, and used my cuffed hands to wedge the edge of the metal table against the grate. With a sharp, sudden kick, I pushed. The metal frame groaned and popped, revealing a dark, cramped maintenance shaft. "What are you doing?" Emre whispered, panic rising in his throat. "Saving my life," I retorted. Before he could stop me, I threw myself into the opening. It was narrow, filled with dust and the humming of heavy machinery, but it was an escape. I crawled as fast as the handcuffs allowed, the metal biting into my wrists, leaving trails of blood on the concrete floor. I scrambled through the pitch-black void, guided only by the distant sound of water and the faint hum of an industrial ventilation fan. I could hear shouting behind me. The guard had returned and found the empty interrogation room. I reached a junction in the pipes and saw a ladder leading upward, ending in a heavy hatch that led to the roof. I climbed, my muscles burning with lactic acid, my breath coming in jagged gasps. I reached the hatch, pushed it open, and hauled myself onto the flat, gravel-covered roof of the detention center. The cool night air hit my face, refreshing but biting. I looked out over the city of Bodrum, the lights of the villa glowing on the distant hillside like a beacon of my past. But as I turned to run toward the fire escape, I froze. Standing by the edge of the roof, silhouetted against the moonlight, was Ice. She wasn't surprised. She was holding a suppressed handgun, her posture as elegant and detached as if she were waiting for a taxi. "I expected you to try something, Clara," she said, her voice carrying over the wind. "You always were too smart for your own good. It's a shame, really. I actually quite liked your design aesthetic." She stepped forward, the barrel of the weapon leveled at my chest. "Emre is a coward. He lacks the stomach for the final step, but I never have." I backed away, my heels scraping against the loose gravel. "You'll never get away with this, Isa. There are cameras. There are people." "There is only me," she interrupted. She pulled the trigger, but there was no sound, only the sharp thwip of the silenced shot. I dived, the bullet whizzing past my ear and shattering a nearby skylight. I scrambled toward the edge of the roof, looking down into the dark abyss of an alleyway 3 stories below. "Jump," she whispered, stepping closer, "and you die in the dirt. Stay here, and you die with a clean conscience. It's your choice, dear." I looked at the drop, then back at her. As I prepared to throw myself over the ledge, a pair of headlights suddenly flashed on from the street below, blinding her. A voice bellowed from the darkness of the alley, a voice I recognized instantly as someone from my past, someone I thought I'd never see in Turkey. "Get away from her, Isa." The voice belonged to the one person I had trusted before I ever met Emre, a person I thought had died 5 years ago. My heart stopped. It was the only person who knew the truth about my real identity. The blinding glare from the streetlights below cut through the darkness like a blade. I shielded my eyes, squinting against the harsh white light, my heart hammering against my ribs so violently it felt like a trapped bird trying to escape a cage. Standing at the mouth of the alley, leaning against a beat-up sedan with the engine idling, was Marcus. 5 years ago, he had been my mentor in the investigative journalism world, the man who had helped me track the initial money laundering schemes that had nearly killed me back in the States. Everyone, even the authorities, had told me he was dead, lost in a burning wreck during a botched sting operation in Chicago. And yet, here he was, staring up at the roof with a grim, knowing expression. Ice lowered her weapon for a fraction of a second, her composure wavering as she scanned the perimeter below. She didn't know who he was, but she recognized the cold, professional stance of someone who had seen combat. "Who is that?" she hissed, her voice laced with a sudden, uncharacteristic edge of uncertainty. "He's the end of your little kingdom, AZ," I spat, my voice cracking with adrenaline. I didn't wait for her to react. With every ounce of strength I had left, I launched myself toward the fire escape ladder that clung to the side of the building, the metal freezing cold under my bloodied palms. Ace fired again. Thwip! Thwip! But the bullets merely chewed into the brickwork inches from my head. I scrambled down the rungs, the metal rattling under my weight, the handcuffs clinking rhythmically against the iron bars. By the time I hit the pavement, Marcus was already there, his hand gripping my elbow, pulling me toward the idling car. "Get in," he commanded. I dove into the passenger seat, the smell of burnt rubber and cheap upholstery hitting me like a wave. As he slammed the car into gear and peeled away from the curb, I looked back. Ice was standing at the edge of the roof, her silhouette framed by the moonlight, not running, not screaming. She was simply watching, a cell phone pressed to her ear. "You're alive," I whispered, turning to look at Marcus, who was weaving through the narrow, winding streets of Bodrum at a dangerous speed. "How?" "The news says what they're paid to say," he snapped, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. I went underground the moment I realized my own department was compromised. I've been tracking Ice's family for 18 months. They aren't just local thugs. They're the hub for a massive international supply chain, and they've been using legitimate businesses, like your design firm, to move capital across borders. They didn't just want the villa, Clara. They wanted your clean tax records to justify their next shipment of prohibited substances. My head reeled. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know." "I know you didn't," he said, his voice softening, though his grip on the steering wheel remained iron tight. "That's why I've been trying to get to you for weeks. I knew she'd eventually try to frame you. She needed a fall guy, and a high-profile, non-resident foreigner is the perfect target for a case the local authorities can close in a week." We screeched around a sharp corner, the tires screaming against the ancient cobblestones. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice trembling. "There's a safe house near the coast," Marcus replied. "But we have a problem. They've already tipped off the local service of internal security that we're on the move. They're calling us hostile elements. They've got roadblocks set up every 2 miles between here and the port." Suddenly, a series of bright, strobing blue lights appeared in the mirror. Not one police car, but 3, moving in a tactical formation that left no room for error. "They're gaining," I said, panic rising. "I know," Marcus growled. He reached into the glove box and pulled out a small, metallic drive. "This contains everything. The names, the bank account numbers, the footage of Icy directing the movement of those packages into your luggage. It's the smoking gun that will bring down the entire organized scheme. But if they catch us before we hit the harbor, they'll bury this, and they'll bury us with it." He looked at me, a desperate glint in his eyes. There's a boat waiting at the docks, but I can't get us both through the main gate. The authorities are closing the perimeter." "What are you saying?" I asked, a cold dread settling in my stomach. "I'm saying I have to act as a distraction," he said, slamming on the brakes as we approached a sharp fork in the road. To the left, the dark, winding path led toward the guarded harbor. To the right, a desolate dirt track led into the dense forest surrounding the Aegean coast. "I'm going to draw them into the hills. You take the drive, run for the dock, and find a boat. Any boat. Do not stop for anyone." "Marcus, no!" I reached for his arm, but he shoved the drive into my hand. "Clara, look at me." He stopped the car, the silence between us heavy and suffocating. "This is the only way. If we both go, we both die. If you go, the evidence lives. The truth gets out." He climbed out of the car, his jacket flapping in the wind. He started shouting, drawing the attention of the approaching sirens, waving his arms to lead them away from the harbor entrance. As the police cruisers swerved to follow him into the hills, the road to the docks cleared. I scrambled into the driver's seat, my hands shaking so violently I could barely shift the gears. I floored it, the car surging forward toward the harbor. I reached the gates, desperate, and saw the flickering lights of a cargo ship moored to the pier. I threw the car into a skid, abandoned it, and sprinted toward the water. I was 10 feet from the gangway when a heavy hand clamped onto my shoulder, spinning me around. I looked up, expecting an officer, but it was someone else. Someone I recognized from my wedding album. It was Emre's brother, the one I had been told was living in London. He held a piece of paper in his hand, his eyes cold and devoid of any family affection. "You really thought you could just walk away with that drive?" he hissed, pulling a weapon from his waistband. "You have no idea how deep this goes, Clara. My mother isn't the one in charge. She's just the one who reports to the real head of the group." He pulled a second item from his pocket, a photograph. It wasn't of me. It was a picture of my father, a man I hadn't spoken to in years, being held at gunpoint in a room I recognized as the villa's basement. "Drop the drive," he whispered, "or your father dies tonight." My heart felt like it had been carved out of my chest. Emre's brother, Cem, the man I had thought was a ghost in our family life, stood there with a steady, clinical gaze, holding a handgun that seemed to swallow the moonlight. Behind him, the dark water of the Aegean lapped hungrily against the rotting pier, a cold reminder of how close I was to either freedom or an unmarked grave. "My father has nothing to do with this," I choked out, my fingers white-knuckled around the small, metallic drive. "He doesn't even know I'm in Turkey." "He knows more than you think," Cem replied, his voice devoid of empathy. "He's been our silent partner for a decade. He's the one who funneled your initial investment funds into our organized scheme, knowing exactly what the graphic design front was meant to facilitate. You weren't a victim, Clara. You were an inheritance, a legacy designed to serve our network once you were married off into the family." The world tilted. The betrayal wasn't just a mother-in-law's cruelty. It was a systemic trap laid by my own blood. I looked at the photograph of my father, his face pale and terrified, and for a second my resolve flickered. But then I looked at the drive in my palm. If I gave it to them, the cycle of corruption would only tighten its grip, and thousands of others would suffer the same fate. "Then he's a traitor too," I whispered, my voice hardening. I dropped the drive, but not to the ground. I held it over the edge of the pier, my arm extended over the black, churning water. "If you want it, take it. But if you step 1 inch closer, I drop it. And if you kill me, I've set an automated delay on my personal cloud server. In exactly 10 minutes, everything on this drive, including your family's direct ties to the local law enforcement, will be automatically emailed to the international press and the Central Service of Internal Security." Cem froze. His arrogance cracked, replaced by a flicker of genuine fear. "You're bluffing." "Try me," I said, my thumb hovering over the drive's casing. "I have nothing left to lose. My husband is a coward, my mother-in-law is a monster, and my father is a criminal. I'm done playing the pawn." At that moment, the screech of tires echoed from the main road. Blue lights flooded the harbor, but they weren't just local police. A black SUV barreled through the harbor gates, followed by two more. Men in tactical gear, wearing insignia I hadn't seen before, poured out, weapons drawn. They weren't the corrupted local unit. They were an independent task force that had been monitoring the harbor for hours, tipped off by Marcus before he led the initial chase into the hills. "Drop the weapon!" one of the agents shouted, his voice amplified by a megaphone. Sam hesitated, his eyes darting between me and the encroaching force. In that split second of distraction, I didn't wait. I threw the drive high into the air toward the lead agent and dove behind a stack of rusted shipping crates. Gunfire erupted, but it wasn't aimed at me. It was a precise surgical takedown of the guards Sem had brought to the docks. I huddled in the shadows, watching as the nightmare of the last few days reached its violent, inevitable conclusion. Sem tried to bolt toward the water, but he was tackled into the wet gravel by two of the agents. Within minutes, the harbor was silent, save for the sirens fading into the distance. An agent approached me, holding the drive. He extended a hand to help me up. "Mrs. Bennett, we have Marcus. He's injured, but he's alive. And we have your father in custody. You're safe now." The next few months were a blur of depositions, court appearances, and a total dismantling of the ICE-led organization. My father, realizing the jig was up, cut a deal to testify against the larger network, finally ending the influence the family had held over the region. Icy was taken into custody in a raid on the villa. She didn't scream or fight. She simply watched with icy, hollow eyes as her legacy was carried out in boxes of evidence. Emre, predictably, tried to plead ignorance, but the digital trail was undeniable. He was sentenced to a massive term for his role in the administrative laundering. I stood on the deck of a ferry 3 months later, watching the coastline of Bodrum fade into the horizon. I wasn't the same woman who had arrived with a suitcase full of clothes and a head full of dreams about a happily ever after. The trauma had left deep scars, but it had also washed away the illusions. I took my wedding ring, the heavy gold band that felt like a weight around my finger, and tossed it into the deep, dark sea. As it hit the water, I felt a strange, profound sense of peace. I had lost the villa, the money, and the family I thought I wanted, but for the first time in my life, the story was finally mine to write. I pulled out my phone, opened a blank document, and began to type the truth. Not for a file, not for a court, but for myself. The cage was open. The lock was broken, and I was finally truly leaving it all behind.